everyone, it's Lexi. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of December and the books that I plan on reading in January. So I think December was my best reading month, especially given the summer slump where I read between June and July and August. I think I read maybe 4 or 5 books. So this month I read a total of 9 books, and for the most part I enjoyed all the books that I read. They're kind of all over in place in terms of genre too, but it was just nice. I finally had some time off work and it was nice just to be able to just relax and read and just hang out. So a lot of my time was spent, just downtime was just reading, which was really nice. So I have a lot of books to talk about, so let's just dive right in. So starting out, I first read The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morrison. This is a book that has been on my list for a while, and in the beginning of the month I wanted to kind of start with these shorter books because I was getting I wanted to make sure I met my 50 books per year goal, and so the shorter books kind of helped with this kind of getting that total up. But this is a book that I think everyone needs to read. It follows Piccola, who is a young black girl who grows up kind of in poverty, and she always has wanted kind of blue eyes, and I think this book is kind of best for not really kind of knowing too much about it, but it was a very heartbreaking book to read, but I think it is one that everyone needs to read. It's not really told from Piccola's perspective, it's told from an outside perspective, which I think it gives it a really unique take on this story, but I think it talks about kind of the internalization of beauty and how blonde hair, blue eyes is considered beautiful, where darker skin, darker hair, darker eye color isn't. And I really think that puts kind of those beauty standards to the forefront, and the dangers that these kind of beauty standards can have with young women in particular. This obviously was the Nobel Prize winner. I think this book was incredibly well written. I really love Toni Morrison's writing style. It was just very beautifully written, but it was a very difficult book to read given the subject matter. So it was a little bit tricky to kind of, digest some of the topics that are kind of going on in here. So make sure, if you are a little unsure, make sure you check out the content warnings for this one. But I think this is a book that everyone needs to read, and I think it's best not really knowing too much about the plot. So like I said, I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. It was really heartbreaking, but a beautiful read. Next, this was another short book that I ended up picking up, and it is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and this book was really interesting. So it talks about kind of the plague that was kind of going throughout England and kind of Europe in the 1500s, and we follow Hamnet, who is a young boy who ends up dying from this illness. And so Hamnet is the son of William Shakespeare, even though it doesn't directly say it, you kind of know it is him, and this is kind of what kind of the historical note that it gives you. So it says, in the 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stafford, had 3 children, Susanna, then Hamnet, and Judith, who are twins. The boy Hamnet died in 1596, aged 11. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamnet. So this book, even though it kind of is about Hamnet, and that's the title, it doesn't necessarily deal with him. A lot of this is him getting sick, and obviously we know he dies because it tells you in the beginning, but we kind of follow the love story between William Shakespeare and kind of Agnes, and we kind of follow them as they meet, fall in love, all of these things, and how that eventually kind of the aftermath of kind of Hamnet dying. I think this book was incredibly well written. I really enjoyed it. It was just really interesting to kind of see how she doesn't even really kind of talk, even address the father as William. They're not really addressed by a name in particular. It is more so it is the father, the husband, which I thought was really interesting. And it was, again, because that he is gonna die, that it was very interesting seeing this build up where the characters don't necessarily know, but you, the reader, know, with kind of the hindsight that they give you with the historical context. And yeah, this book was just really, really, really fun. Not fun, but it was just a very unique read, given how it's kind of a very disjointed storyline, but I thought it was really well done. My only complaint was that I felt like the ending dragged out a little bit too long, but I did really enjoy it nonetheless. So if you're looking for historical fiction that is something a little bit different, I think this is a really great book to pick up. Next up, this is a fantasy duology that really took me by surprise with how much I loved it. Like, as soon as I finished the first book, I had to go out and get the second one. And it is the Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig, the first book being One Dark Window, and then the concluding novel being Two Twisted Crowns. I gave this a 4 and then a 5 out of 5 stars. It was really, really great, especially because this is a duology and I could like marathon it very quickly. I could I was just deeply invested in this world, and the payoff that you get with a lot of the stuff that's like developing in the first book, the payoff in the concluding novel was really great. And yeah, this is definitely, I think, one of my favorite kind of adult duology, like fantasy series, even duologies, I would say. I think my favorite fantasy duology, and definitely one of my favorite kind of unspoken gems for fantasy. So this one actually really took me by surprise, but the premise of this is that we follow Elsbeth, who lives in this community that has been plagued by this kind of fog for years, and this fog can infect kids when they're young, that where they, if they don't die, they end up getting magical abilities. And so people who have these magical abilities are sentenced to death. And so Elsbeth is someone who has survived the fever, and she's kind of been in hiding at her uncle's house. But one of her like magics that she kind of picked up is that when she touches, or I should say in this world, there are providence cards, which are cards that were created hundreds of years ago that give people magical abilities. And there is only a select few of these cards around, so they're very valuable. So Elizabeth's magic that she inherited is that when she touches a card, she absorbs the magic. So in this case, when she was very young, she touched the nightmare card, and so the nightmare ended up coming in her head. So it's like this monster that is in her head, and it kind of goes off from there. I wasn't really expecting too much out of this, but I really enjoyed it. I was obsessed. Like, I read this, it ended on such like a crazy cliffhanger, and I had to go out and get the next book. Like, that's how good this one. Like, I didn't want to wait till like a delivery for this book. Like, I had to go out and get it. And like I said, the payoff in this one was really incredible, seeing like the initial kind of storylines taking place and finally seeing them come to fruition in the final book. So I really like this. If you're looking for a very unique fantasy, I think this is a really great one, and it's all like both books are out, so you can marathon them. It was really unique. I really loved it, and I was, like I said, pleasantly surprised. But I think this has been one of my favorite reads of the year, was this duology in particular. So like I said, I couldn't put it down. Like, I just couldn't wait to dive in, and that's how invested I was. There is like a romance in here, which I like didn't really kind of feel for. Like, I didn't find it that believable, but I was able to look past that because I really loved the plot and the characters and the dynamic, and just I wanted to figure out the mystery that was in here. So like I said, I couldn't put this down. Definitely a highlight probably of 2023 for sure. So after riding high from the Shepherd King duology, I ended up picking up Looking for Jane by Heather Marshall. And again, this is probably one of the best books that I read the whole year, and this is why I always wait to film my favorite books of 2023, because I feel a lot of the times the best books that I read happen to be in December. So this one definitely took me by surprise, but it kind of follows 3 different storylines. So we follow Angela, who works at this antique store, and she finds this letter that is addressed to a woman from her dying mother, and the dying mother tells her daughter that she is in fact not her biological daughter. She was taken from this like, I would say, like church institution, where in the 50s they would take women who young women who have gotten pregnant, and then basically force them to take their babies up for adoption. So she kind of admits that to her daughter. So we follow Nancy, who is the daughter that got addressed this letter, and then we also follow Evelyn, who is pregnant. So we follow Evelyn, who is a doctor who ends up becoming a gynecologist and works with the underground kind of abortion clinics in the Toronto area. So we kind of follow the weaving of these 3 kind of storylines through different decades. So we follow Nancy, who's a teenager and kind of later on in her 20s and 30s. In the 80s, we follow Evelyn in the 50s and 60s, and then we have the present day storyline with Angela. And this book was fantastic. Like I said, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It was incredibly moving and I think very important. One of the things I found really interesting, and I think what this subject talked about, even though this book is about abortion, I think kind of the main kind of takeaway of this is how the different types of motherhood and how motherhood can be defined in many different ways. And I think that is what this book is to the core. Even though it deals with the importance of having, it has themes about how it's important for women to have access to safe and affordable abortions, but also it talks about the different types of motherhood. And I think that was where the book really has that warmth, and there was some very kind of shocking revelations at the end, but I really loved how everything kind of came together. I was deeply invested in all these women's stories, and just the interweaving of them I thought was really well done. And I think this is a very important book that everyone needs to read as well. I think especially kind of growing up in Canada, abortion was always available to me, and I didn't know that abortion was legalized in the US first and then Canada a little bit later. And especially now with kind of what is kind of going on within the United States, it shows why abortions are, you know, necessary and they need to be safe, because this kind of book delves into the darker side of the lengths that women had to go to avoid pregnancy or kind of terminate pregnancy when they didn't want it, when it wasn't, you know, safe or legal. So this book shows how far we come, but also how far we still need to go in order for women to have all this. So if you're looking, again, I think this was probably one of my favorite books from the whole year. Definitely worth picking up, and like I said, it was incredibly moving. So after finishing these great books, I was like, I feel like I need, especially with kind of looking for Jane, just because it dealt with kind of heavy subject matter, I felt like I wanted something a little bit more easy to read. So I went for murder mysteries, because I do read through them pretty quickly. And these were the last two on my shelf that I haven't, of like series that I've read that I haven't finished yet. So I wanted to be able to kind of check them off on my list, so then these series for the most part are kind of done at this point in time. I ended up picking up Trapper Road by Rachel Caine and Carrie Ryan, which is, I believe, the final installment in the Stillhouse Lake series. So this author passed away, I want to say in 2020, 2021. So she kind of had the kind of format for this book and like the storyline narration kind of already plotted out, and so before she passed away, so then Carrie Ryan came in and kind of concluded this series. But this follows Gwen, whose husband was a very notorious serial killer, and everyone always believed that she was somehow involved, but she was kind of not aware of this going on. So even though she was acquitted and found to have no connection to the crime or being aware of these crimes that her husband was committing, people still think she was somehow responsible and like was kind of behind everything. So she's kind of been hiding with her children. In this case, we follow them many books down the road from that like initial point, where there is this kind of cold case where she becomes a private detective, and she gets addressed to kind of find this girl who went missing a couple months ago, and it kind of goes off from there. This book, like, I did enjoy it, but there are also very many kind of things that are just with this series in general that I found really annoying. I do really love the murder mystery aspect and the build up and ultimately kind of the chaotic climax that comes about with a lot of crime novels at the end. I did really enjoy that, but for me, the characters of the kind of siblings, like the kids in here, are just super annoying, and I cannot stand them. They are just really immature, they whine, they complain, and I feel like there's like a lot of like issues that they kind of touch on with these kids, and they're like, oh, they're cured, but it's just like really annoying how these kids don't really kind of grow or develop or evolve, or they could kind of tackle more of like PTSD, kind of having to grow up with knowing your father is a killer, like kind of delve into that. And this has been just as a complaint of the series overall, and just I'm looking at my notes too. I said that you kind of have to do a suspension of disbelief, especially with this one in here in particular. With I could like figure out early on, but there was a lot of suspension of disbelief kind of, or suspension of belief in terms of like how these things kind of planned out, or like I was able to figure out, but like I kind of had to like suspend my belief a little bit.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Oops, sorry Siri, that scared me. And to kind of just to conclude everything, like I do have issues with how guns are kind of used in here, and like people don't really like, especially the kids in here with the gun culture, like there's no consequence for using guns or having access to guns or kind of just using them for their own gain, and like that I do find really problematic. And again, that has been something that I've complained about even from the first book. So these are just kind of common, you know, issues that I do have with this series. But I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed the murder mystery aspect, but it's just some of the characters that I don't really like, and it just have gotten really repetitive with some of the things with people coming after this family because they're of who their father was. So it's just been annoying, and I think like I don't know if they'll make any more with like the kind of the second author with this series, but I think I'm kind of done with this series. Like I enjoyed it, but I don't think if they do release any more within this, I don't think I will read anymore. So next up, I picked up the kind of newest release in the Tracy Crosswhite series by Robert Dugoni, this one being One Last Kill. This is a book that I got for my birthday earlier in December, and so I was like, I'm in a crime mood. I go through these pretty quickly, and I do really enjoy these. I think these books are really well done, and so this follows Tracy Crosswhite, who was previously a homicide detective for Seattle, but she kind of has transitioned from kind of active homicide investigations to cold cases, and this is one that I think really kind of ties in with a lot of the loose ends and kind of things that were unraveled in the last book that I won't talk about. But this follows kind of a series of murders, or like a serial killer that was at large over 25 years ago, and all of a sudden they were never able to catch who the killer was, but all of a sudden the murders like stopped happening. So Tracy is kind of asked to open up this cold case because of a article that's going to be written about how the Seattle Police Department wasn't able to solve these crimes. So she's kind of tasked with trying to see if she can find any new information, and goes from there. This one was incredibly fun to read, and I did not guess who the killer was in this one, which is very rare for me. And it was just really a lot of fun. I think especially with these kind of being cold cases and kind of trying to uncover, you know, evidence or trying to get new perspectives or, you know, witnesses in a time where people may have died, moved, all these things, like all of those obstacles that come with time kind of, you know, passing. I do really like kind of solving a mystery where so much time has passed, and I really enjoyed this. It was super suspenseful, and I did not guess who the killer was in this one, which I found pretty surprising. So I really liked it. This was, again, I think if you want to start the series, I think you need to read them in order, especially the last one. I'm blanking on the previous one, but they're kind of connected in terms of things that were uncovered. So I'm very excited to see what Tracy has next in store. But this is just like a really fun kind of crime series. So this one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, because I was just on a reading roll, I wanted to finish up with these 2 books that I got for Christmas from my fiance, which are kind of a collection of short stories. First being my Man Jeeves, and then the Inimitable Jeeves by PG Wodehouse, I think that's how you pronounce it. But basically he knows that because we watched Downton Abbey together, and I really love that era. And I feel like Downton Abbey is very much a serious take on that kind of time period. And this one is more kind of satirical in the sense. So these are just kind of a collection of different short stories that were like written by this author, where we follow a man and his butler Jeeves, and the kind of main character who the butler kind of works for is like very, I wouldn't say he's not very smart. So he kind of finds himself in funny predicaments, and then kind of Jeeves is the one who helps him get out. And I thought these were really fun. I read through both of these in one day. That they were pretty quick to read because they're short stories, and I found them very funny. There are times where I would be like kind of giggle or kind of just laugh out loud because these were just really fun. And I gave them both 3 out of 5 stars. Like I really enjoyed them. They were just a lot of fun. They were kind of formulaic, but I still felt they're really enjoyable. So I think if you do like Downton Abbey, I think these would be really fun because they do deal with the same time period, like where people who are in the aristocracy in England are kind of slowly running out of money, and kind of with the kind of clash between the, you know, people upstairs and the people downstairs. But I feel like it's done in a very satirical way, so which is a lot of fun. So like I said, these were really fun, and yeah, just another, you know, if you like Downton Abbey, I think you will really like these. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about the books that I plan on reading in January. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because I know I've been talking for a little bit. But first up, this is a book that I'm currently reading right now and about halfway through, and it is When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. And because I will be kind of moving to Montreal for a couple months, these books are a little bit chunkier because then I was like, I'm bringing fewer books, but because they'll take me a little bit longer to read. And this one I just wanted to kind of throw in because it does take place in Montreal, but it takes place in the late 1800s, where we follow two friends named Marie and Sadie, and they kind of live in the kind of higher affluent area of Montreal. Marie comes from a very rich affluent family, where Sadie is more kind of passing off as upper class, and so they kind of have a very kind of, their friendship ends in violence, and we follow these two friends over the course of a couple decades, how they kind of spend time apart, come back together, and everything in between. But I think it's kind of best not really kind of, you know, knowing too much about it. But I think this book is really interesting. It's been very captivating so far. So far I'm really liking this one. Next up, these are two books that I'll be bringing with me to Montreal. And they're kind of the new books in the kind of His Dark Materials spin-off series. By Phillip Pullman. I read the His Dark Materials trilogy for the first time a couple Christmases ago, and I really enjoyed these worlds, the world that he created. And I feel like my fiance read these ones too, and he said he really enjoyed them, but they take place in different kind of time periods within that world. So I think this one is kind of a prequel before Lyra, and then this is, I think, afterwards. But I don't want to really know too much about the plot. I just want to kind of dive right in. But if you're familiar with the His Dark Materials trilogy, I think you'll like this. But I also randomly have this picture of me and my siblings in here for whatever reason, but I think these will be just kind of fun to dive right in. And I read through His Dark Materials pretty quickly, so I think these shouldn't hold me up too long, but these have been on my shelf, I think, since like the end of 2021, so I feel like I need to finally kind of finish these and kind of check them off my TBR. Next up, I have the 7th installment in the Cormoran Strike series by Robert Galbraith. This is the newest release that came out last year that I just haven't gotten around to reading, but I figure this is a big chonker of a book that I'll just bring with me to Montreal, because it'll keep me busy when it's kind of cold and dark outside. So again, with crime series, I don't really, especially ones that I've like read a lot of books in, I don't really like to know too much about the synopsis, so I'm gonna kind of just dive right in. This follows Cormoran Strike, who is a private detective in London, and his partner Robin, who helps him solve these cases. So yeah, this will be another one that I'll be reading this month. And lastly, this book comes out at the end of January, and I'm so excited for it. So I think I might have, like, I will obviously will not have this one done and read by the end of the month, but definitely will be starting it. And it is House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This is the next installment in the Crescent City series, and I'm so excited, especially with this book ending, like the previous book ending on such a big cliffhanger. I'm very, very intrigued to see what is going to happen, and I just cannot wait to dive in. Like, I'm so excited for this book, you have no idea. But it follows Bryce, who lives in this kind of metropolitan, fantastical urban world where she's half fae and half human. And in the first book, her best friend ends up getting murdered, and she gets approached by the investigation to kind of help solve whoever killed her best friend, and it kind of goes off from there. But I'm so excited. This book I've been waiting eagerly for, and I cannot wait to dive right in. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you read in December and which ones were your highlights and all that. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.